I know that you work in English language text, so I'm asking you to maybe stretch a little bit. I don't know, maybe you've thought about this before, but what do you think the biggest obstacles are or might be to interpreting ancient texts? And how do you think a cognitive approach can help?
Yeah, I've had this discussion with colleagues of mine who work in medieval studies, and I know that's sort of short range history compared with the Turks that you're looking at. But you know, and we've had this discussion about, or at least there's a discussions in the field as well, as to say, well, can you apply matters of modern psychology to, you know, what they never like to call the medieval mind, as if there's a thing, you know.
Right.
And I guess that I suppose I don't really believe that people change fundamentally. Clearly, there are some aspects of our knowledge and our interaction with our environment that are different, and that's going to affect our sort of mind cast, I guess, across time. But you know, there's this, you know, I've seen it where you look at I don't know, sort of elegiac or grief texts from Middle English or early modern period, and people would say, oh, you know, well, this is sort of expresses sadness, but so many, the infant mortality was so high, or people didn't live so long that they must have just got used to it. They must have had a different perception of death and grief than we have. And actually, I don't believe that at all. You know, if you read some of the stuff, you know, about some of the desperately sad literature from earlier periods, it speaks to a modern sensibility exactly the same as it would now. And
Right.
you can absolutely cast and see that mind and feel empathy for that mind across the centuries. And I think that, you know, the fundamentals of embodiment, I mean, embodiment's a key concept in cognitive science, that doesn't change. So,
Mhm.
you know, the trivialities of embodiment might change. You know, we wear different clothes, we live in houses with heating systems, we don't have to carry water generally in the Western world. But the fundamentals of gravity and sunshine and getting older and feeling creaky and getting hot when you're angry, you know, that stuff, that's always been the same right into prehistory. So if cognitive science is based on that sort of notion of conceptual embodiment, and
Mhm.
that's a constant across time,
Mhm.
then I guess consequently you can have some faith that that this approach is going to be relevant.
Mhm.
Um, though of course I recognise that, you know, the cultural expression of that is going to vary quite a lot
Mhm.
when you look at different societies or different setups or different perceptions of the world.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm not
So
sorry.
there's certain things that are the same, and the way our minds process
Mm,
is the same, but recognizing that those contextual elements that provide inputs may be changing.
yeah, I mean, there's some things that, you know, you would have to take account of. So I remember reading John Donne's The Ecstasy, where there's a line about our eye beams crossed, and so, you know, pre Newton's optics, the
Ah,
general sense of light was that,
yeah,
you know, instead of light bouncing around things and coming in your eyes, that your eyes had sort of beams that came out to look at things. And you
right.
even see it in some sort of artworks and lino cuts, you know, people looking at something with like a line coming out of their eyes to the thing. Now, Donne bases a metaphor on that in The Ecstasy and in his poetry. So you have to understand that different view of how sight works in the 17th century in order to understand what the hell he's talking about. But you know, beyond that, I don't think it doesn't affect the sort of metaphor of an emotional connection with the person that he's talking to. That's the same. In fact,
Yeah.
the metaphor is what they've essentially done is literalize something what we would now see as a metaphor.
Mhm.
You know, sort of eye contact. I mean, think of the metaphor behind contact. Isn't it? Your eyes aren't actually touching, but we
Right.
essentially still use that metaphor.
I think those are all the questions I have, unless you have something that you'd like to say to those who are listening in about using cognitive poetics in their work. Any encouragements you might have?
Well, I'd be interested in what you're doing, because you know I come across people's. It's especially sort of nice and humbling when people use your own work in their field and adapt it in all sorts of ways that I didn't anticipate. And
Yeah.
what's brilliant about it is it's often not just an application. You know, the understanding or the model needs to be altered in the new circumstance as well, and that's really interesting to me. So, if anyone's listening to this who's using this stuff, not just my stuff, for stuff from the field broadly, in interesting ways, I'd be more than delighted to hear about it. I'm always interested. Yeah,
That's great. So that's an invitation for continued conversation.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and so that's perhaps a good place to stop. But thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure this will be very beneficial to our viewers. Thanks so much.
that's quite right. Absolute pleasure.